It was a warm afternoon in a bustling city when Charles Benton stepped into the gleaming showroom of Regal Motors, a well-known luxury car dealership. At 72 years old, Charles carried himself with a quiet dignity. His salt and pepper beard and neatly pressed suit hinted at a life of wisdom and accomplishment, yet his modest demeanor betrayed none of the affluence he had amassed over decades of hard work. He was here to buy a car, not just any car, but a top-of-the-line model he had been eyeing for months. Little did he know this visit would take an unexpected turn and change not only his life, but also the lives of everyone in that showroom. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The showroom was alive with energy, filled with sleek vehicles that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. Salespeople, clad in sharp suits and wearing fixed smiles, hovered around potential customers like bees to honey. The air smelled of fresh leather and coffee brewing in the corner. Charles paused near the entrance, taking in the scene before making his way toward a convertible he had admired online. The car gleamed like a jewel, and he could already imagine himself cruising down the coastline with the wind in his face. Despite the dealership's busyness, Charles noticed something odd. Not a single salesperson approached him. He stood by the convertible for several minutes examining its features, but his presence seemed to go unnoticed. Nearby, a younger couple had just walked in, and 3 salespeople immediately swarmed them, showering them with attention. Charles raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Maybe they thought he was just window shopping. After another long wait, Charles decided to take matters into his own hands. He approached a salesman who was chatting with a coworker near the front desk. The young man glanced at him briefly before returning to his conversation. Charles cleared his throat politely. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Could I get some help with the convertible over there?" The salesman turned to him with a forced smile, his eyes scanning Charles from head to toe. It was a quick, dismissive glance that spoke volumes. "Oh," he said, barely masking his disinterest. "Are you sure you're in the right place? That's one of our premium models." Charles didn't flinch. "I'm aware," he replied evenly. "I'd like to know more about it." The salesman sighed, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. "Well, it's pretty expensive," he said, his tone condescending. "Maybe you'd be more interested in something over in our pre-owned section." Charles felt the sting of the words but maintained his composure. He had faced discrimination before. Growing up in the segregated South, he had endured far worse. But it never failed to sting. He decided to give the dealership one more chance. "I'm interested in that car," he repeated, his voice steady. "Could you at least show me the specs?" The salesman exchanged a smirk with his coworker before shrugging. "I'll see if I can find someone to help you," he said, walking away without another word. Charles stood there watching him disappear into the back office. Minutes passed, then more minutes. No one came. Charles finally left the showroom, his heart heavy but his resolve unshaken. As he walked back to his car, he thought about the decades of hard work that had brought him to this moment. Born into poverty, he had built his wealth from the ground up, starting with a small construction business that eventually grew into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He had faced countless obstacles, racism, financial setbacks, health scares, but he had never let them defeat him. And now, here he was, being dismissed like he didn't matter. That night, Charles couldn't sleep. The experience replayed in his mind like a bad dream. He wasn't angry, he was disappointed. How could a business treat potential customers with such disrespect? Didn't they understand the value of kindness and professionalism? He thought about the young salesman and his dismissive attitude, and a spark of an idea began to form. Charles had the means to do something about this. He wasn't the type to dwell on negativity. He was a man of action. The next morning, Charles made a series of phone calls. By noon, he was sitting in the office of his financial advisor, a sharp-witted woman named Angela, who had helped him navigate countless business ventures. "You want to buy the dealership?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's right," Charles replied, sipping his coffee. "I've done my research. The owner is looking to sell. I want to make an offer." Angela studied him for a moment, then smiled. "You've always been full of surprises," she said. "Let's make it happen." Over the next few weeks, Charles worked quietly but diligently to acquire Regal Motors. The process was smoother than he expected. The dealership's owner was eager to sell, and Charles's offer was more than generous. By the end of the month, The paperwork was finalized. Charles Benton was the new owner of Regal Motors. The following Monday, Charles walked into the showroom, this time as the man in charge. He wore the same neatly pressed suit, but there was a quiet authority in his step that hadn't been there before. The staff barely glanced at him as he entered, still mistaking him for an unimportant visitor. Charles smiled to himself. This was going to be interesting. He called for a staff meeting, gathering the salespeople, managers, and office workers in the conference room. The young salesman who had dismissed him weeks earlier lounged in a chair near the back, his arms crossed and a bored expression on his face. Charles stood at the front of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "Good morning," he began. "My name is Charles Benton. I'm the new owner of Regal Motors." The room fell silent. The salespeople exchanged nervous glances, and the young man in the back straightened in his chair. Charles let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. "I had an experience here recently that left a lasting impression on me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I came in as a customer, ready to make a purchase, and was treated with blatant disrespect." He paused, letting his words sink in. The staff shifted uncomfortably. "That kind of behavior is unacceptable," Charles continued. "Not just because it's bad for business, but because it's wrong. Every person who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look or what you assume about them." Charles then did something no one expected. He handed out envelopes to each employee. Inside was a severance check and a letter terminating their employment. "Effective immediately," he said. "You are no longer employed at Regal Motors. This dealership needs a fresh start, and that begins with a new team." The room erupted into chaos. Some employees protested, while others sat in stunned silence. The young salesman who had dismissed Charles weeks earlier was among the loudest. "You can't do this!" he shouted. "I've been here for years!" Charles met his gaze without flinching. "And in all those years you never learned the value of respect," he said simply. "Good luck in your future endeavors." Charles Benton's transformation of Regal Motors wasn't just a tale of poetic justice. It became a parable about the power of integrity, respect, and perseverance. In the months following his decisive takeover and the mass dismissal of the staff who had failed to meet his standards of decency, Charles went deeper into his vision for the business, shaping it into something that transcended its original purpose. What began as a simple act of reclaiming his dignity grew into a movement that redefined the way people thought about customer service, community impact, and business ethics. One of the first things Charles did after hiring his new team was to organize a retreat, a 2-day immersion designed not only to train but also to inspire. He invited industry experts, motivational speakers, and even customers to speak about their expectations and experiences. The retreat wasn't about sales techniques or upselling strategies. It was about empathy, respect, and understanding the human element behind every transaction. "People don't just buy cars," Charles told his new staff during the retreat. "They buy experiences. They buy dreams. A car might be a milestone for someone, a first job, a family's road trips, a retirement gift to themselves. When you sell someone a car, you're selling them a piece of their story. Never forget that." The retreat was a resounding success. Employees left feeling not just trained but inspired, understanding that their work had a purpose beyond quotas and commissions. Charles personally ensured that each member of his team felt valued. He implemented policies that emphasized fair pay, generous benefits, and opportunities for growth. He believed that happy employees would create happy customers, and the results soon validated his philosophy. The dealership began hosting community events, a tradition that hadn't existed before. Charles opened the showroom for weekend gatherings, turning it into a space for car enthusiasts, families, and local entrepreneurs. There were car shows, charity drives, and free workshops on vehicle maintenance. The dealership partnered with local schools to offer scholarships and internships, introducing young people to the automotive industry. Charles wanted Regal Motors to be more than a place to buy cars. He wanted it to be a pillar of the community. One Saturday afternoon during a charity event hosted at the dealership, a woman approached Charles. She introduced herself as Diane, a single mother who had recently purchased a used car from Regal Motors. With tears in her eyes, she thanked him for the dealership's transparent pricing and the kindness she had received during the process. "It was the first time I felt like someone actually cared," she said. "You have no idea how much that means to someone like me." Moments like these reaffirmed Charles's mission. He knew that behind every customer was a story, and behind every story was an opportunity to make a difference. For Diane, it wasn't just a car. It was her means of getting to work, taking her kids to school, and reclaiming her independence. Charles made a mental note to expand the dealership's programs for single parents, offering discounts and special financing options. While the dealership thrived, Charles also found himself reflecting on his own journey more than ever before. He had always been a private man, but his new role placed him in the spotlight. Journalists and community leaders were fascinated by the story of the unassuming older gentleman who had quietly purchased and revolutionized a business. He was invited to speak at business conferences where he shared his philosophy on leadership and integrity. Despite his newfound fame, Charles remained humble, often deflecting credit to his team and the customers who inspired him. One day, Charles received an invitation from his alma mater, a small historically black college where he had earned his degree in business decades ago. They wanted him to deliver the commencement address. Charles hadn't returned to the campus in years, but the memories of his time there were vivid. He remembered struggling to pay tuition, working late-night shifts to make ends meet, and dreaming of a future that felt impossibly far away. Now, standing on the stage in front of hundreds of graduates, he felt a wave of emotion. "I know many of you are wondering what the future holds," Charles said, his voice steady but warm. "You may face challenges that seem insurmountable. You may encounter people who underestimate you, dismiss you, or tell you that you don't belong. But let me tell you something. Their opinions do not define you. Your determination, your character, and your willingness to rise above adversity, that's what defines you." His words resonated deeply, and the graduates gave him a standing ovation. After the ceremony, a young man approached Charles, clutching his diploma. "Mr. Benton," he said, "hearing your story gives me hope. I want to start my own business one day, just like you did." Charles smiled, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Then promise me this," he said. "When you do, treat every person you meet with respect. That's the foundation of success. More than money, more than power, more than anything else." Meanwhile, back at Regal Motors, Charles continued to innovate. He recognized that the automotive industry was rapidly changing, with electric vehicles and sustainability becoming more important than ever. He began investing in renewable energy initiatives, installing solar panels on the dealership's roof, and offering incentives for customers who purchased hybrid or electric cars. He also partnered with local organizations to host workshops on eco-friendly driving practices, making the dealership a leader in environmental responsibility. One of the most ambitious projects Charles undertook was the creation of a mobility fund for underserved communities. He understood that for many people, transportation was a barrier to economic opportunity. The fund provided low-interest loans and grants to help individuals and families purchase reliable vehicles, enabling them to access jobs, education, and health care. The program was life-changing for many, and Charles took pride in knowing that Regal Motors was making a tangible difference in people's lives. Despite his many successes, Charles never forgot where he came from. He often visited the neighborhood where he had grown up, reconnecting with old friends and supporting local businesses. On one such visit, he stopped by the barber shop he used to frequent as a young man. The owner, an old acquaintance named Ray, greeted him with a grin. "Charles Benton, the man of the hour!" Ray exclaimed, clapping him on the back. "You've come a long way, brother." Charles chuckled, sitting down in the barber's chair. "Just trying to do my part," he said. As Ray trimmed his hair, they talked about the changes in the neighborhood, some good, some not so good. Charles listened intently, taking mental notes. He decided to establish a grant program for small businesses in the area, providing funds for renovations, marketing, and other needs. He knew that revitalizing the community was about more than just charity. It was about creating opportunities for growth and self-sufficiency. Through it all, Charles remained deeply connected to his family. His two daughters, both successful professionals in their own right, often teased him about his newfound celebrity status. "Dad, you're practically a local legend," one of them joked during a family dinner. "When are you going to run for mayor?" Charles laughed, shaking his head. "I think I'll stick to cars," he said. But in truth, he cherished the moments he could spend with his family, sharing stories and watching his grandchildren grow up. They were his greatest source of pride and the reason he worked so hard to make the world a better place. Years passed, and Regal Motors continued to thrive. The dealership became a model of excellence, earning national recognition for its innovative practices and community impact. Charles, now in his 80s, began to think about the future. He knew he couldn't run the business forever, and he wanted to ensure that its legacy would endure. He assembled a leadership team composed of individuals who shared his values and vision. Among them was a young woman named Lisa, who had started at the dealership as an intern and risen through the ranks. Charles saw in her the same determination and integrity that had guided him throughout his life. One day, he called her into his office. "Lisa," he said, "I've been watching you closely. You have the skills, the heart, and the drive to lead this company. When I step down, I want you to take over." Lisa was stunned but deeply honored. "Mr. Benton," she said, her voice trembling, "I'll do my best to make you proud." Charles smiled. "You already have." When the time came for Charles to retire, the entire staff threw him a grand celebration. Customers, community leaders, and friends gathered to honor the man who had turned a moment of personal disappointment into a lifetime of impact. As Charles gave his farewell speech, he looked out at the faces of the people whose lives he had touched. "This isn't goodbye," he said. "It's just the beginning of a new chapter. For me, for Regal Motors, and for all of you. Remember, success isn't about what you achieve for yourself. It's about what you give to others." Charles spent his retirement continuing to support the causes he cared about, mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing time with his family. His legacy lived on through Regal Motors, a shining example of how one man's vision and integrity could change the world. Charles Benton's retirement, though richly deserved, did not mark the end of his influence on the world. In fact, it served as the catalyst for a new chapter in his journey, one defined by legacy, mentorship, and an enduring commitment to making a difference. After stepping away from Regal Motors, Charles found himself with more time than he had ever had in decades. Time to reflect, time to give back, and time to invest in causes that were dear to his heart. The next phase of his life would be as impactful, if not more so, than his tenure at the dealership. Shortly after his retirement, Charles launched the Benton Foundation, an organization dedicated to fostering economic empowerment, education, and entrepreneurship within underserved communities. The foundation's primary focus was on creating opportunities for individuals who, like Charles once had, faced systemic barriers to success. Drawing on his own experiences, Charles wanted the foundation to offer more than financial aid. He wanted it to provide guidance, mentorship, and a sense of hope. The first initiative under the Benton Foundation was the Pathways to Prosperity program, which provided seed funding and mentorship to small businesses in struggling neighborhoods. The program was revolutionary not just in its scope, but in its hands-on approach. Participants didn't just receive grants. They attended workshops, connected with experienced business owners, and gained access to resources that would help them sustain and grow their ventures. Charles personally visited many of these businesses, from mom-and-pop stores to tech startups, offering encouragement and practical advice. One of the businesses Charles mentored was a small bakery owned by a single mother named Teresa. Her bakery was struggling to stay afloat, but she had a passion for her craft and a dream of expanding her business. With the foundation's support, Teresa not only turned her bakery around, but also opened a second location within 2 years. She named one of her signature cakes after Charles, a gesture of gratitude that brought tears to his eyes. "You believed in me when no one else did," she told him during the ribbon-cutting ceremony for her new shop. "You changed my life." The foundation also emphasized education. Charles believed deeply in the transformative power of knowledge and wanted to ensure that young people had access to the resources they needed to succeed. The Benton Scholars Program provided scholarships, mentorship, and internships to students pursuing degrees in business, engineering, and environmental science. Charles had a special interest in the latter. Given his commitment to sustainability, he wanted the next generation to not only thrive, but also protect the planet for future generations. One of the scholars, a young man named Jamal, stood out to Charles. Jamal came from a neighborhood not far from where Charles had grown up and shared a similar story of overcoming adversity. With the help of the Benton Scholars Program, Jamal earned a degree in mechanical engineering and went on to design innovative solutions for renewable energy systems. At the program's annual gala, Jamal spoke about how Charles's mentorship had inspired him to give back. "Because of Mr. Benton," Jamal said, "I learned that success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about what you inspire others to do." As the foundation grew, so did Charles's reach. He began collaborating with other philanthropists, civic leaders, and policymakers to address broader systemic issues. One of his most ambitious projects was a nationwide initiative to improve public transportation in underserved communities. Charles knew firsthand how important reliable transportation was for accessing jobs, education, and healthcare, and he wanted to ensure that no one was left behind. The initiative brought together engineers, urban planners, and community leaders to design systems that were efficient, affordable, and environmentally friendly. Despite his packed schedule, Charles made it a point to stay connected with the people whose lives he touched. He often visited the neighborhoods where his foundation worked, chatting with residents and listening to their stories. It was during one of these visits that he met Rosa, a high school senior who had dreams of becoming an architect but lacked the resources to pursue higher education. Moved by her determination, Charles arranged for her to receive a full scholarship. Years later, Rosa returned to her community as a licensed architect, designing affordable housing that transformed the area. Charles considered her success one of his greatest achievements. In addition to his philanthropic work, Charles began writing a memoir. It was a project he had long resisted, feeling that his life story was just one among many. But as he saw the impact his journey had on others, he realized that sharing his experiences could inspire people in ways he hadn't imagined. Titled "Against the Odds: A Life of Resilience and Redemption," the memoir traced his path from a humble upbringing to becoming a respected businessman and philanthropist. It was a deeply personal account, filled with anecdotes about his triumphs, failures, and the lessons he had learned along the way. The memoir became a bestseller, resonating with readers from all walks of life. Charles was invited to speak on talk shows, at universities, and at international conferences. While he appreciated the recognition, he remained grounded, often deflecting attention to the people who had inspired him. "This isn't just my story," he would say during interviews. "It's the story of everyone who dared to dream, who persevered through hardship, and who refused to let circumstances define them." As his influence grew, Charles was approached by political leaders who encouraged him to run for office. They believed that his integrity, wisdom, and ability to connect with people made him an ideal candidate. But Charles declined, insisting that he could do more good outside the political arena. "I'm a builder," he said. "I build businesses, relationships, and opportunities. That's where I'm meant to be." One of the most meaningful moments of Charles's later years came during a reunion with the staff he had hired after taking over Regal Motors. Many of them had gone on to achieve remarkable success, crediting Charles's leadership and mentorship for their growth. They organized a surprise celebration to honor him, presenting him with a plaque that read, "To Charles Benton, a leader who taught us the true meaning of respect, integrity, and compassion." During the event, one of the attendees was Lisa, the young woman Charles had chosen to succeed him at Regal Motors. Under her leadership, the dealership had not only maintained its reputation for excellence, but had also expanded to include multiple locations. "I hope I've made you proud, Mr. Benton," Lisa said, her voice filled with emotion. Charles smiled, his eyes misty. "You've exceeded every expectation," he replied, "and that's exactly what I hoped you'd do." As Charles entered his 90s, his health began to decline, but his spirit remained as vibrant as ever. He continued to mentor, to inspire, and to dream. On his birthday, surrounded by family, friends, and colleagues, he reflected on his journey. "I've lived a blessed life," he said, "not because of the wealth or the accolades, but because of the people I've met and the lives I've been fortunate enough to touch. If I've done anything worth remembering, it's because of the love and support of all of you." When Charles passed away peacefully in his sleep a few years later, the outpouring of love and respect was overwhelming. Tributes poured in from across the country, honoring a man who had turned a single moment of indignity into a lifetime of impact. Regal Motors held a memorial service where customers, employees, and community members shared stories of how Charles had changed their lives. The Benton Foundation established a new initiative in his memory, continuing his work to uplift communities and create opportunities for those in need. Charles Benton's legacy was more than the dealerships he transformed, the scholarships he funded, or the businesses he mentored. It was a testament to the power of resilience, kindness, and the belief that every individual has the capacity to create positive change. His story became a beacon of hope, inspiring generations to dream big, act boldly, and treat each other with the respect and dignity that every person deserves. Charles Benton's legacy extended far beyond the achievements of his lifetime. After his passing, his vision and values continued to ripple through the lives of those he had touched. What made his story so powerful was not just the scale of his impact, but the way he wove his personal principles into every endeavor he undertook. Even in death, Charles's life became a symbol, a blueprint for others seeking to bridge the gap between success and significance. The Benton Foundation, now led by an energetic and dedicated team that Charles had carefully mentored, expanded its reach to international shores. Recognizing that the challenges Charles sought to address were not unique to his hometown or even his country, the foundation launched global initiatives aimed at fostering economic development and education in underserved regions. One of the most ambitious programs was the Benton Global Fellowship, which connected young entrepreneurs from marginalized communities around the world with mentors, funding, and resources. The fellowship program became a resounding success, with participants from as far afield as Kenya, India, and Brazil. Each fellow carried forward Charles's ethos of humility, determination, and service. One fellow, a young woman named Amara from Nairobi, used her fellowship grant to develop a solar-powered irrigation system for rural farmers. Her project transformed local agriculture, ensuring food security for thousands. In her acceptance speech at an international sustainability conference, Amara credited Charles Benton as her inspiration. "His story taught me that when we build something, we must think of how it can serve others," she said. "That's what legacy means. Not what you leave behind, but what you set in motion." Back in the United States, Regal Motors thrived under Lisa's leadership. She introduced innovations that carried forward Charles's commitment to sustainability and inclusivity. One of her proudest achievements was opening a specialized division within Regal Motors dedicated to wheelchair-accessible vehicles and adaptive driving technology. Lisa's division partnered with mobility organizations to ensure people with disabilities had access to affordable, customized vehicles, offering independence and freedom to a demographic often overlooked by the automotive industry. The project, aptly named Benton Mobility, became a national leader in accessible transportation. Lisa also spearheaded a program to recruit and train veterans, providing them with opportunities to transition smoothly into civilian careers within the dealership network. Many of these veterans spoke about how their time at Regal Motors gave them not just jobs, but a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. The dealership itself became a model of what a workplace could achieve when guided by values of inclusivity, respect, and innovation. Meanwhile, the cultural impact of Charles's memoir, Against the Odds, continued to grow. The book became a staple in schools, business courses, and leadership workshops. Educators used it to teach students about the importance of perseverance, while leaders in the corporate world drew lessons from Charles's emphasis on empathy and ethical decision-making. A renowned filmmaker even approached the Benton family with the idea of adapting the memoir into a feature film. The movie, titled Rising Above, became a critical and commercial success. It captured not just the pivotal moments of Charles's life, but also the quieter, more personal battles he had faced. Audiences around the world were moved by the story of a man who had turned adversity into action and indignity into inspiration. The film sparked widespread conversations about the importance of treating people with dignity, regardless of their background or appearance. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the dealership ignoring the man? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.